Hi, this is Paul. I want to continue talking about universal basic institutions. This is something that we started on a live stream a few weeks ago. I actually just dropped the link. It's probably full by the time you see this. Some people, I'm going to do a live stream again this Friday. Some people always ask, well, how do you get on your Friday live streams? Friday live streams are for members. There's 3 levels of membership. So one is really cheap and often you can get a free one. Usually during the Friday live streams, I'll usually give out free memberships. So I don't know what I'll be talking about Friday because we do it estuary style. So we'll see what gets brought into the group. But I wanted to continue on. I mentioned Luke's live stream and OG Rose. I'm going to be talking to him next week, but I wanted to play a little bit with what he talked about with respect to pluralism because I thought it was very helpful. But first I want to talk about institutions a little bit. I was thinking this morning about institutions and about the way that institutions work and the tiny little deals. It's almost like institutions are little religions or little gods. Because when you go into a marriage, you're basically offering a sacrifice for a certain desired outcome that you're looking for. In fact, Jordan Peterson, of course, was talking about sacrifice before he went on his latest medical leave, let's call it. And you make these little voluntary sacrifices. So you give yourself to the institution within a realm, and then you hope that gift, that sacrifice, that commitment then bears good fruit. And you commit yourself to a business or a job or a something. Institutions are always asking for something on one end and promising to give something on the other end. Now, I think as a culture, I think Jordan Peterson's right on this. We have sort of tried to get as much as we can for as little to give as possible. That's a fairly, it's a very common thing, and it's a very human thing. But what happens is that you tend to get weaker institutions, and then you get the abandonment of institutions. But I mentioned in yesterday's video that what we wind up doing then is creating other institutions, usually institution-avoiding institutions. Like, I'm not going to marry someone, I'm just going to have a partner. And so you don't make the sacrifice, but then you discover that you've actually bound yourself in other ways. So instead of sort of coming into something that's been more formalized, where the expectations, outcomes, responsibilities have been set, sometimes over a very long period of time, sometimes very broadly culturally, you kind of stumble into something and find that you're already in something, and there are going to have to be other sacrifices made on the way out. Now, how does this connect up with pluralism? Now, pluralism is a very big topic. I mean, it's basically you're talking about differences. And as I mentioned in a conversation I had today, people today want openness, and everything have sort of become the ideals that we as a culture have looked for. And we want to get openness and everything as cheap as possible. What happens, though, is, of course, we bump into differences, and we bump into people with differences, and now our differences are formed over time. There's this great sedimentary layer conversation that I had a long time ago. Now, on the video that I released this morning, Jordan Peterson's Exodus series episodes 1 and 2 are available on Daily Wire Plus. Senior Saboya, I thought, left a tremendous comment. Senior Saboya wrote this: I haven't watched the new series, but I plan to do so by this weekend. What you said about the Jews reading Torah via a legal path and normies reading the Bible via a cultural hodgepodge rings true for me. I was just talking with my mother over the holiday about her connection to the church, the faith, and the Bible. Naturally, I've heard some of what she said my whole life, but it had never struck me how the structure of her faith is also sedimentary. Now, that's sedimentary, not sedentary. Sedimentary meaning that as she went along, all of those mappings from when she was a child on up sort of created for her what I call collective biblical relevance realization. It's sort of the pathway by which the Bible comes to her. Now, this is different from hermeneutics. Hermeneutics are sort of rules of interpretation. What I'm talking about is much more unconscious, much more implied, much more basic to a culture's ability to appropriate the Bible and take it in and integrate it with life. So I'll read that sentence again. Naturally, I've heard some of what she said my whole life, but it had never struck me how the structure of her faith is almost sedimentary. Layer after layer of affirming deposits have been laid over her lifetime. Having never made a concerted study of these matters, she seemed to have developed and maintained a set of ideas over her life that somehow opened spiritual doors for her. It's idiosyncratic and very personal. It's what has proven to work for her. And I think what Senior Saboya has basically showed us is given us a vision into how this works for many of us. Now, some of us, that's a great metaphor. I have to trim my beard, and usually what I do when I trim my beard is I just take it all off again because it's just easier than trying to slope it, because otherwise the beard just keeps going this way, and I get a point where I just get sick of it. I just want to get rid of it. And then I look at a video like that, and well, maybe I'll trim it. I don't know what I'm gonna do. Anyway, the beard, leaving the beard aside, that image stuck with me because it was so powerful. And there's a way that these institutions are like that in us too, in that institutions are built of expectations that are out there in the culture and within ourselves that have sort of developed. They're built out of habits. They're built out of all sorts of other things that they're not sort of rationally constructed. I always just chuckle when people imagine their lives are just rationally just they've chosen everything in their life. Combinatorial explosiveness just blows that away. You can't choose everything in your life. You have to keep taking these programs. I got to find that Dave Busatil video where he talks about the programs. Is a very thin self in the midst of a cacophony of parts. I'm going to play this little clip from, I believe I played it in a previous video, A21 live stream, one of Luke's live streamings in the moment, and David Busatil, who I think has been... See, this is part of the reason. Yeah, I know the TLC is a very strange thing for most of you, because it's like, why would I watch these randos videos? Increasingly, YouTube is going to get worse and worse at helping you find better and better things. And it's going to be our relationships that connect us to each other. This is actually going to make the TLC even more and more valuable as we go forward, because actually, sort of like this commitment thing, the longer I invest in it, and I have a bigger investment, but I also get bigger outcomes out of it, because every day I'm pouring new homeroom ideas into this thing, and it's coming out with things. And it's not like AI that comes out with slop. There's a lot you have to sort of sift through, but you find nuggets in there. And when you find these nuggets, they become part of the sedimentary layers. They become part of sort of the automatic institution evolution that comes from this. Really energizing the corner lately with his participation. He does Bible studies in Jacob's Corner. Jacob, you should rename your channel Jacob's Corner instead of Federecci. Not that there's anything wrong with Federecci, but Jacob's Corner is just a lot easier to remember origins of his family of origin. David Booth live stream lately, and I think he's about programs. This image of programs can sort of be interchanged with image of parts. And so I'm going to drop that right here.
I've been thinking recently in the ability to see, my wife will do things, and now I use this expression, which is run program, which is like one time she wanted to make this salad, and like it was a Greek salad, but she wanted to throw avocado in it for some reason because we had some that was going bad. And I made the salad completely, but didn't include the reason why we made it, which was to use the avocado. And she's like, but I said that that's why. And I said, no, no, no. I just ran the Greek salad program.
Mm.
I just turned it on. And then as soon as I run that program, and like we've had these conversations because so much of your day is actually choosing which programs to run. And as soon as you hit play on those programs, then it just goes through. And I don't, that's when I stop thinking. That's
Yeah.
when I plug the earbuds in and I can do whatever.
Yeah.
I can't.
And this, of course, is where the NPC meme comes from. This is sort of the possession that certain mid-level spirits do. I think Trump derangement syndrome is a mid-level possession spirit that you just say Donald Trump and it hits the Trump program and certain group of people just go in that way. That's just what they do. And I had a conversation today about sort of lower level spirits, but mid-level spirits. And the thing about mid-level spirits and even higher level spirits, this is what I mentioned. One way or another, this will find its way into the TLC memory hopper. This is a point that I've made in sermons quite a bit. I don't know that anybody ever hears this point because nobody ever. I find this old adage from Bell Labs that says if you have a new idea, don't worry about people stealing it, because if you actually have a new idea, you have to bang people over the head with it. Jesus can dispense with individual spirits with a word. Legion, come out. You just see Jesus doing all of this stuff, raising the dead with a word, stilling the storm with a word, healing Jairus's daughter with a thought. I mean, Jesus can just handle that stuff without any problem at all. But he's on the Mount of Olives looking over the Jerusalem, weeping for it, because I've longed to gather you as a hen gathers her young, but you won't. Well, what level spirit is that? Well, that's a mid-level spirit. And what actually happens is Jesus is crucified, raised, ascended, and Jesus over time has been moving those spirits slowly. The little individual spirits that everybody pays attention to, well, that's one thing. But these parts that David is talking about here are sort of little programs and spirits and gods and institutions within us.
I can do some of my work, my day job, while I'm listening to however many complicated podcasts.
Yeah.
That's completely fine when I'm running the program of my work.
Yeah.
But then sometimes I have to hit pause and actually focus, and then I can see things.
No, and that's a perfect illustration of Peterson will talk about this, Jordan, when he's talking about how we build in neural networking. And it's the same thing as subsidiary focal integration. It's what Polanyi's talking about, is you pay attention when you're learning.
If you have a Luke Thompson card, you have to have subsidiary focal integration, because that's kind of the same idea.
Learning a new skill, you have to focally pay attention to it with your prefrontal cortex.
And I love the fact that they're having this conversation while Chad is laying tile. I love that because there's the illustration of it. It's right down there below. That's why I love this clip.
So that you can learn this skill, you have to give it attention. Yeah. Then once you've given it attention and you've integrated it, you've built a neural pathway into your subconscious, and then you can run the program. Then you don't have to pay attention to it. And,
and then people are going to say, oh, yeah, but, Luke's already explained biologically how this happened, therefore spirits aren't a thing. It's like, no, that's not how the world works. The world is working on multiple levels at the same time. Just because there's a biological level in which the instantiation is going doesn't mean there isn't a spiritual level in the same way.
Right, now I don't know. That's right. Yeah. And that in and of itself affects how we see details, to what extent we're able to see things.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
And I guess that's probably kind of my argument. It's almost like that people intellectually so much are just running programs. They're just repeating knowledge or models over and over and over. This is why it just bothers the shit out of me when people just reference intellectuals and just quote them. And I'm just like, do you have any thoughts of your own? Because if you're just repeating people, you probably don't understand things in the way that you ought to understand them, in the way that I'm talking.
And here's where Chad comes in.
Really.
Really.
You're the biggest quoter in the corner. You always quote.
Yes,
Well-
but okay.
Well, let's see how this goes. Is like we have these conversations about possession as like an entirely negative thing. But I think that when you include the notion of the Holy Spirit and everything else, that possession is actually like a regular part of life. That it's like I become possessed when I clean my house, right?
Mm.
I become focused and I just do the one thing while not doing the other thing. And it's like you have to take these breaks to make decisions as to what you're letting in, because most of our lives necessarily cannot be always like noticing everything all the time.
No.
I have to run. I mean, even because I've had this conversation to some extent with my wife, I'm right now in this conversation running the program of the conversations about running programs I've had twice before.
Yeah.
Right? Like right now I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And being pulled out of it because I'm realizing that even this conversation is a program.
Yeah,
Mhm.
completely. And that's like what Peugeot, we've mentioned that a ton about Peugeot is, Paul will talk about that. When he first started listening to Peugeot, he couldn't make sense of what he was talking about at all. But then he got used to it. He habituated himself to it. He focused on it, repeated it, and it was initiated into it. And then he could understand what he was talking about.
Yeah. And I just when we got onto this topic, wanted to jump in because I totally agree. It was funny. Sunday, I talking to a friend from church about everything I did, and went to church, served, did all this stuff. Went home, packed for a trip, went back out with friends, and and he's like, "Wow, it's cool that you did all that. That's awesome that you were able to get all that done." And it was funny because I was like, "Yeah, but that's just the meta program of being part of this community." Of they're making it easy, and there's even sub programs of I learned, I got a
And again, in Alan's comment, you see institutions, because that's what institutions do. Institutions give you a program. Now you're going to tinker with it and do it your own way, and you're going to add some of your other programs to it. And then if you add your programs to it and it's a better learning than what the institution has, the institution upgrades. That's part of the reason that diversity and pluralism can be really helpful, because it affords new learning and new things can happen.
bike membership, which is you can rent a bike, and that means instead of a 20-minute bus ride to my friend's house, it's actually a 7-minute bike ride. But I didn't make City Bike. I didn't there's this whole little world and all these things integrate together that are, some person who works for the city made this program. So all these different meta programs that that aren't even at my level, I'm not at the substrate to affect those. It's the church community and the pastor and the city planner and the people who designed New York City 200 years ago. They're all coming together to make it so that these things can get accomplished. But growing up, there's so much of this, at least in suburban America, that I experienced. There's so much you're doing it. You need to study, you need to do these things. And it's yeah, that's not how humans work. You can't just be run program 90-hour work week, run program, get a perfect score on SAT. It's that's not the correct level of analysis.
And the program itself does not evaluate whether or not the program is a good program.
Yeah.
Right. And that became a big conversation I've had with my wife, because I don't know what needs to be cleaned in the house. So when I clean the house, I have to consult my wife what is important right now? Because when we first got married, she says something was important, and that just became the only thing I did when I was cleaning the house. And she's like, no, this also needs to be done. Yes, but what level of importance is that? I can run them. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And if you have company coming over, that changes the hierarchy. If you, if you do this, if you start, using one part of the house more, that changes all this. And, why are you using that part of the house more? And, so there's all these levels of, at which you need to offload that decision-making process because it becomes too complicated. Because cleaning your house is actually like connected to every other part of your life. Sorry to cut you off. Continue, David.
No. That's big. I completely agree.
And now, talk about internal family systems is something that. All right, so as always, the links are below. I clipped this out. I put it on the Vanderclips channel. I again am I'm letting it run. I don't know if I should or not. It just doesn't get that much traffic. Do you see the little live ring around here? And if you click on that, I'm going to get into it in this conversation. And it's currently playing my. There's a randoing Chad the alcoholic. Here's a whole bunch of randos. There's Cassidy. That was a fun conversation. It's kind of fun leaving this play on my. It's kind of fun leaving this play because I do check in every now and then and just listen to snippets and then often think, oh, it'd be fun to just take a little clip from here and a clip from there. But anyway, that's running, and that's running 24/7 at this point. The reason I'm doing it is I can do it for free. I just have a computer that's in my office anyway that I use for various things around church. It's a little Mac Mini. It uses hardly any electricity. And I just created a massive database of hundreds of conversations and threw it at it, and it's just play. It runs its program. Anyway, so let's get at OG Rose's contribution to the pluralism conversation, because I thought he really set it up well.
I appreciate you opening the space. I think it's a very important topic. So, and please stop me. I'll just some opening framing. So we know, for example, like when we say pluralism, there's pluralism in the sense of a government that can hold difference and people that have different views, and you don't get a civil war. Then there's pluralism, say the ability for different nations to engage in free markets and to interact and to get along. And then there's pluralism in the sense of the Christian runs into the Muslim and they're able to get along, right? So there's kind of different layers of this question. Indeed, you could say a lot of the dream of the Federalist Project, and we'll just say let's just say the American Project, although that's a vast generality and is not adequate, but is a notion that you could have a certain procedure and certain institutions that people will agree that if we submit ourselves to, I think Mark was correctly describing this, that the outcome that comes out will be one we can all agree with, even if it's not the outcome I like. Because
okay, so right away you see, okay, so we've got pluralism, and institutions are a way that we manage pluralism, especially in, let's say, this political space of the United States, which is this massive country. A lot of Americans don't realize how massive a country it is. Once I started doing YouTube and started looking at my analytics, even though only about half of my audience is American, the rest of that audience is spread amongst a whole bunch of other smaller countries. America is like one big, rich pot compared to the rest of the world. And if you're doing anything that has to do with analytics or commerce, you're going to recognize that. So institutions, Daniel was sort of riffing off Mark D. Parker there, you have to give yourself to them to a degree if they're going to work. And in that way, they're sort of like a little god. Or a little religion. You can't just, you have to give yourself to it. You have to give it your attention. You have to give it your money. You have to give it your time. You have to give it a piece of your life. And there's an implicit exchange in there. You're hoping that you'll get something out of it. You give yourself to a marriage. You're hoping that you're going to get children, sex, partnership, family, heirs, all of this stuff. But you have to give yourself to it. If you don't give yourself to it, you're not going to get anything out of it. You're probably going to destroy it. And it's the same with churches. It's the same with all kinds of things. And so that's an interesting space where institutions comes in. And again, Paul Allen was here, and they're universal basic institutions, that the idea that with his schema that he had, there's, let's see, I can pull up the taxonomy. We talked about this, that there are these various different aspects of life. There's functions and examples, institutional vessels, and so there's definitely a sacrificial relationship with respect to them.
As I trust the institutions, I trust the law, and so on and so forth.
And again, right there, it's you have to trust the institutions. That's pistis. That's faith. You have to have faith in the institution. You don't get married unless you have some degree of faith in the institution of marriage. You don't use a bank unless you have some degree of trust in the bank. You don't enter into any kind of sacrificial relationship with an institution unless you have a degree of trust in it. And again, it's a lot like little gods or little religions.
Now, Habermas talks about the legitimation crisis, and we don't believe in institutions anymore, and we think the law is corrupt, and et cetera, so forth. So people start.
And so this gets into Rod's story about religion. And I played in yesterday's video. I know the way that these videos work, that some of you see a lot of them. A few of you see all of them. Most of you only see a few of them, depending on algo and the thumbnail. So maybe I'll drop Rod's little talk in here.
My politeness gets in my way. By the way, on the Scott Adams thing, like I texted, on our little signal thing, I texted the other day to you and the group. I said, "This is big. What he's doing right now, he's inviting us to his deathbed. Like that ritualizing death. Like we need updated rituals, and he's experimenting. He's leading the way." And I thought, like, that's very big what he's doing. Okay, this is probably the hardest thing or the harshest thing that I would have to say on the subject, present company considered. And so before I say it, I'm gonna tell a quick little story so you'll understand a little bit of the context. Paul, some of this PBK, some of this will sound familiar. So I was raised in a fundamentalist, Bible-based home church environment, and very, very strict. No TV in the house, no radio in the house. Like we read the Bible every morning with my dad. Like this is serious, right? Yeah. Of course, I hated it. But being the conscientious little kid I was also all in. Like I hated it, but I just want to be normal. But I also wanted to participate. But I remember, so this particular group doesn't matter. Details aren't important, and I'm not here to single anyone or anything out in particular. But one of their claims was that they went all the way back to the apostles, that they were the one true church. Sound familiar? And that they were the truth, capital T. And it had no beginning. There was no founder. There was no, it just goes all the way back, right? And of course, they couldn't have anticipated the internet. So they didn't know that this lie, because that's what it was a lie, would ultimately be revealed, right? And I remember as a kid, it was one of those groups, somebody from the old country, kind of a firebrand, split off from some tent revival thing in Ireland and came to the States and started setting up meetings all over the country and sending people out 2 by 2. And during the same time that you've talked about many times, Paul, about that others were doing the same thing, right? And so he had a name, and now on the internet, you can find the newspaper article clippings about when this all happened, right? And then he kind of went crazy and started declaring himself the Messiah and moved to Jerusalem and waited for Christ to return. It just went crazy. And then he was excommunicated. But his fellow co-founders, some of them were still alive when I was a very small child. So I remember meeting them. They're in their 90s. One was over 100 years old, I remember. And so I've physically been in the same space with the guys who knew the truth. So I say that story so you understand a little bit about my formation, right? It's like you lied to me, right? You lied about something kind of important, right? Now, I would argue that it was replete with lies. But that was one of those, like, it's a lie. I can use that word. I don't have to say it wasn't true. I don't have to say it was a misunderstanding. I don't have to say it's like, well, it's a matter of faith. Like, no, this was a lie. This was like, there were people who knew. Now, I'm sure there were many who did not know. It was like that man's name was just erased from the history of the organization. It's like, we just don't, it's like, he who must not be named. And if you bring it up now, oh, I see you've been on the internet. Right. So that, will hopefully help you understand a little bit about my orientation and maybe some of the people out there watching too. Like, but again, my point is not to direct disproportionate critique in that direction, because like this is the point I'm about to make, right? The truth ends up really mattering in terms of the health and life and sustainability of an organization. And my belief is that institutions, the real corruption has been to become extremely, let's say, flexible with the truth. And I understand that word, like, it's not as if I claim the truth or anything like that. It's just we know when we see that we have been deceived, right? Or misguided or misled, or right? And so my take on the last 500 years is, little by little, the explanatory power of particularly the religious institutions, has been degraded by better explanations, right? And so instead of, many organizations have been like, well, we got to update our priors now because we have this new information. We know a lot more about the universe that we occupy and so forth, right? Many organizations have sort of plugged their ears and said, like, not listening, right? But just so I don't reserve my criticism for religious institutions, we also had the president of Harvard, testify to Congress that she couldn't tell you what a woman was or whatever, right? Like, so the reason why that was
footnotes.
So also, right? The reason why that was so catastrophic is because the rest of us are watching. It's like, you're embarrassing yourself right now. Yet within that cloistered environment, that hermetically sealed self-referential echo chamber, they had completely lost the plot in terms of an actual commitment to the truth, right? Of course I could go on. I'll stop. But the what I'm interested in is how often I see a lot of hand waving around, well, is it true or not, right? And even within the TLC, I'm surprised at how little I see engagement with, say, like a Dr. Bart Ehrman or like a James Tabor, like people, deep biblical scholarship who are at least challenging a lot of the premises behind, Christianity, right? And that doesn't mean necessarily that I'm challenging Jesus Christ, the historical figure, because like I actually, I kind of like that guy. But I have a lot of problems with the institution that has grown out of that movement. And I'm not going to be the first to say, I wonder what the man Jesus Christ would think of the movement that carries his name today. That is the harshest thing I can and will ever say about the subject, but that hopefully it will help you understand, where I'm coming from.
Now, this crisis of legitimation has everything to do with people's experiences young, or even people's experience old. And there's an interesting way in which the internet factors in on this. Even if, let's say, a particular institution only fails a single-digit percentage of the people involved, my guess is that the internet is going to magnify that. Because if I think about, let's say, my family of origin, my cousin's level, there are 2 divorces amongst my cousin's level. Among 3 divorces. And they're all successively later. So very early on, marriage seemed like a safe bet. You just didn't know that many divorced people. But now suddenly you have the internet. And again, you tend to have what leads on the internet. It's sort of the most heart-gripping stories or the most fearful stories. And then you have statistics. And statistics are this weird world that we invest so much authority in. And so what you have are, instead of, maybe you went to church and your pastor was a good guy, like most of the pastors were fine. But then you hear about high-profile cases of moral failure, and then suddenly there's this cascade. And so part of what pluralism has done, partly just because of how our salience landscapes work, fight or flight, fear, anxiety, these things live in a disproportionate level. Suddenly institutions are starting to fray and there's a crisis of legitimation. And when institutions are starting to fray, then you no longer make the necessary sacrifices to invest in the institution. And then you wind up getting into like these secondary God level institution. Well, we're not going to get married. She's my partner. Oh, but do you really think just because you're not paying the upfront costs that those other later costs all along the way aren't going to come true? Oops. Play.
Questioning that, right? So you have the institutional way to deal with pluralism is arguably failed for many people, in the eyes of many people. And if you say it hasn't, there are people that disagree with you, and that itself is a pluralistic difference. So you have a problem, right?
Yep.
Now, the other idea of, say, the Fukuyama-Washington consensus is the notion that, and this goes back to Quinn, Josefina Quinn talks about the Silk Roads and Zarathustranism and all these different things. And we see in history ways that economic exchanges and trade can deal with pluralism because people are trading spices and it could be Jews.
And now this is also, I think, something that has to do with materialism, because with trade is an interesting thing because trade usually revolves around things and then it extends up to, let's say, services, goods and services. Services are a little tougher to trade. You need much more trust in order to trade services because there's always sort of a future thing with services. You have to cut a little sacrifice. And then again, then you wind up with institutions. Trade, it's like, oh, here's gold, or here's food, or here's something. And both of you need it. So you sort of park all of your other aspects of life and say, I'm going to put those over there and just trade this thing. Recently, Algo served up for me a little video of somebody came into contact with an Aboriginal tribe in the Amazon that had very little contact. And of course, these groups will usually kill you right away because that's their, that's the level of exposure, trust. There aren't mediating institutions. Now, a little bit later in this video that I'm not going to play, Paul Allen talks about mediating narratives and mediating institutions. And Michael Sartori, he had some good conversations too, in terms of time and this, and then desire for more.
Jew, Christian, Muslim, and they don't kill each other, right? Dietrich McCloskey talks about this to other people, but there's this idea of the Washington consensus in capitalism being that, okay, I may not understand your worldview, but if we all trade markets and what Marx may call the commodity form, it kind of functions as a universal language where we can interact even if I don't fully understand one another, because in a sense, we reduce one another to the interaction of the economics. And in this way,
and that reduction is so important because you don't need the whole person. You just need the little element. And, today we have these we have these pluralistic nation states, but in the old world, this is where, again, the First World War transition is so important. You had these old style empires and you invest in the empire or you invest in the king, and there, to a degree, consent of the governed comes along later, but there is implicit consent of the governed, or at least fear. And again, you're managing your pluralism in different ways. An interesting part of the whole woke conversation was the fact that, of course, depending on where you are, the kind of the egalitarian ideal says there won't be any cost for differences. And that's just never the case. Now, you might want to reduce those costs for differences because, again, there's sort of this contraction and say, when it comes to this, these are the only, you want to do some relevance realization in there and say, these are the only things relevant. And so in America, when we talk about, all men are created equal, or we'd say equal before the law, we're reducing people down to, it doesn't matter what their other aspects are. Did they do this in this situation at what cost to somebody else? And then, you just reduce it down. So this reduction is super important here.
Reductionism is not necessarily bad Because if we're vastly diverse and different, we're unintelligible to one another. But if we come together in the economic exchange and in a sense reduce our difference, we can interact and then like a zip file uncompress when we go back to our society.
And now institutions are vitally important there because institutions do this reduction. When I walk into Walmart, I'm a consumer. I've been reduced to a consumer. And, you know, we have laws about this. They shouldn't care what I believe about this or that, or, you know, what I've done, if I have a criminal record, if I'm a jerk to my dog. If I have money, I get the goods for this. Now, in other places, you go into a restaurant, it's pretty standard, say, right to refuse anyone for any reason. It's like, not really, but they're just sort of giving this disclaimer that there's a reduction here that when you come into a restaurant, you need to behave in a certain way. And Peterson, of course, talked about this. We have all of this reduction that has been built into us by schools, by parenting, by all of this, so that when you go into this, you perform this liturgy. And again, there's a tiny little institution there. There's a tiny little liturgy. And this is the way you behave when you go into a bank. And this is the way you behave when you go to a baseball game. And this is the way you behave when you go into a church. And these are sort of like the programs. And so all of these levels are going in, and, you know, we don't even think about them anymore. And, you know, and it's interesting, if I go into a church with someone who was, let's say, a cradle Catholic, you watch them doing things, and as a Protestant, it's like, I don't do those things. And then when I go into their church, they're very much doing those things, and then I feel like I'm in their space. I don't know the institutions. I don't know what I need to do.
And so you come together and uncompress, and there's really a sense in which the way that the world has always dealt with pluralism, because of course, pluralism's a funny term. You know, Europe, Huguenots, I'm from a Huguenot, America, you know, there's always Methodist, Baptist. It always depends on the gradient of extreme you're talking about, right? And I would note that the difference we always care about in pluralism is moral difference. It always comes down to that. Things we think are moral.
Okay, moral difference. And this is where I really liked, now in yesterday's video, I posted a link. Paul Allen gave me permission. Because what he's really working on there is, okay, well, what is this moral system with universal basic institutions? Are there basic institutions that sort of scale up all the way to the top? Because he noted that certain institutions, let's say it's an institution to, I had a conversation with a couple before I married them, and they were talking about their dating practice. Like second date, they had a 3-hour conversation on spanking. That was really important for one of them. And I think it was a no spanking house. And, you know, they had to talk about that. But there's certain institutions, as, you know, the idea that Paul has is that, well, they're universal, more universal than income. But they also sort of scale all the way up, because there are some institutions, let's say, you know, certain cultures, when the man dies, it's expected that the wives die with him. So you throw the wife on the funeral pyre when the dude dies, and it's like, no, we're giving that one up. And in fact, the British, you know, stopped that in India. Well, why? Well, you had a sense that that institution isn't going to actually scale all the way up. And so while there's a fair amount of flux within institutions at different levels, he's looking for institutions that, let's say, are really basic and they really scale. And you're probably not going to have a good society without, and I would say marriage is one of the oldest, most universal institutions we know. Now, there's tremendous variety with it, but you're really going to be hard pressed if you don't have an institution of marriage that has sacrifices and expectations, and that are not just contractual between people. For a while, libertarianism was really hot, and I knew some people that were giving up a lot of things, and I'd have conversations with them. I'm like, how's the road going to get built? No, it's like all the neighbors contract for that road, and it's like, yeah, but then you're going to have to contract for the next road over, and if you want to have a railroad, you're all going to have to get together on the gauge. And so you just see the things getting built up, and there has to be that sort of scalability.
Disagreements. It's not merely the taste of food and holidays. is when we have a disagreement on an ethical issue. And Dr. Hunter, in his book Before the Shooting Begins, was warning about this in the 90s. But anyway, so basically institutions allow you to compress, interact, decompress when you go away from the institution and your difference. Economics does the same. Oh, but what if people feel like the economic system failed or is leading to a Nickland singularity? So we don't trust the economy, right? We don't trust that interaction. Oh, and by the way, as Marx points out, as you participate in the economy, it trains your habits to be unable to interact with the world in terms beyond, say, the commodity form.
And this point is so important. He made it in a previous video, and here he makes it again, because it's not the case that institutions are these static things, or, I'm using a God metaphor, a religion metaphor, because it's not a static thing. That institution will shape you. And, this is part of what I was talking about yesterday, that we make all of these decisions pre-consciously. Those decisions have been formed in us. And it's actually, to a degree, the sacrifices we give and the institutions that we give ourselves to that do all this formation, that begin to change what we see and how we respond to it. That's so foundational and so important that, yes, we sort of hover above these institutions and imagine, okay, I'm going to give myself to this. I'm going to trust in this. I'm going to, I'm going to go into this, but that thing then is going to shape you. And that's going to then shape institutions that are further downstream and institutions that go further.
Pricing. Like an example I would make is if you say, I'm going to go learn guitar because I value it, and someone says, why are you going to be a musician? And you say, no, they're like, that's stupid. Yeah. And actually, you're trained to believe that if you're not going to get paid to do something, it's not a good use of time. And you actually have you need kind of the philosophy and idea that it is a good use of time. Otherwise, you don't. And then you're not going to have a way to form community.
And this connects with Dave Busatil's programs, because you're sort of selecting programs. Well, I'm not going to select the guitar program because, it's not going to get me anywhere. And I remember, I don't know how I should feel about this. When my oldest son, he was a good basketball player. He was a little disappointed that he didn't get as tall as I am, but he was a good basketball player, much better basketball player than I ever was or ever will be. But, he was in high school and he was playing varsity basketball. Not until the senior year did he really get a good number of minutes. But, and then he's like, he's planning on playing in the NBA. And I basically said, you better need a plan B, because truth is you're never going to play in the NBA. How dare you crash his dream? Yeah, but at the same time, he was good, but he wasn't that good. And he was 6'1". He wasn't 6'5". That would have really helped him. If he was as good as he was and he was 6'5", yeah, it would have been even then. So we actually, a member of the church who played professional baseball and, was in the Angels in the Outfield movie as one of the players there. He played a lot of minor league ball, dipped up into the majors now and then, but he learned a lot in that, because he learned that, unless you're LeBron James or, just a freakish star, whether or not you actually break that top rank is going to be super dependent on whole myriads of things. How did I get talking about this?
You didn't learn all those skills and abilities you needed because you only did the things that made you money, right? So then the economy is training your habits in a certain way.
Oh, yeah. So, the NBA, and it's like, and he played basketball. He's just recently not playing some more, partly because he'd play all these pickup games in the city that he was living in. And basically, he was a good player, and that annoys some people who think they're better players than they are when they get outplayed. And then he was going in, and someone basically, gave him the kind of foul that knocked him to the ground, and he broke a bone in his arm. And it was like, my playing requires a context of good faith players, and just pickup games in the park, there's a risk involved in that. And, and he's now in his 30s. And so it's like the joints are starting to, he's been playing that game all his life.
That makes it difficult. So this is the last thing I'll say before I can keep going. So now I think when we think about pluralism, basically we're kind of at the last line of defense now, because I don't know if we can jump up to those three and have them fix the issue of pluralism, because they're in legitimization crisis, and you'd probably have to reestablish polar trade agreements or whatever, and there'd probably have to be a war or
Can
something.
you reiterate the three
So
economics?
So you have, we could say the economic is a way to deal with pluralism. You have the institutional, which I think Mark was toying. And the last one here is the literal encounter. The Muslim and the Christian, us all coming together.
okay, so, and this is part of the reason why you're having this civilizational conversation now, where people are saying, well, we need institutions, we need common norms. And now part of what has made the American experiment so powerful was that we sort of avoided all of that. We sort of sidestepped what Europe had done and said, well, let's just keep a lot of the things implicit, and they'll be more caught rather than taught, but some of them will have to be taught. And we'll have a system, and basically, as long as it's sort of Protestant, Western European, as long as we have those norms, and then we don't need the formal institutions that we look at as institutions. We don't have to make our sacrifices to the institutions. And again, there, part of what you had in America was that there was a great degree of commonality and many different levels, and that commonality is now being stressed, and it's being stressed in many different ways, because not only is there sort of a retreat from participation in religious institutions, there's retreat from participation in other institutions, and some of this is due to just diversity, although America's always had a lot of diversity and has been able to sort of negotiate its way through. Michael Sartori talked a lot about negotiating, but now the speed of change is so fast, it's difficult for people to negotiate, and so people are just sort of defaulting to older forms or older institutions, or they're actually looking back and think they're defaulting to older institutions. I'm old enough now to say, no, not really. You're just sort of making stuff up that looks like it's old. It's like faux old institutions, because I knew those old institutionalists, and they came to it with so much more faith and commitment and understanding about stacks, but they were also tended to be narrower. And so, part of this crisis that we're at, but I think there's more than 3 points. Now, what Daniel's about to say gets to, I think, I'm in a small signal group with I arranged that group with some key TLC leaders. It's a fairly small group. And we talk about this kind of stuff. And, I think part of what's happening in this space is we're kind of doing the important conversation with each other and the important negotiation that Michael was talking about.
Together, form of pluralism, right? Yeah. And basically, I would argue that if this doesn't work, then people aren't going to see a reason to do the work to restore the other two, right? Because it's actually just kind of hiding the fact that we don't want to get along, and in that way it's repressive, and that way it's a lie. And also, I don't even benefit. A lot of people feel like they don't even benefit from modern capitalism. They don't benefit from the system. In fact, as a minority, I feel like the system is set up to keep me down, and it's to help the privilege, right, et cetera, right? So if we can't restore the face-to-face, well, then there's no evidence to think it's worth restoring the other two. Now,
and I don't know if it's quite that stark, because again, the truth is we have so much. We take for granted so much. And if you live in a place in the world for long enough where you can't take basic institutions for granted, the failure of certain institutions in America would make nobody happy. And so while those institutions are struggling, I don't know that those institutions will be abandoned, because the lights stay on, the water stays on, the traffic runs. I talked about this yesterday. You just say, okay, we're no longer going to use Interstate 5 through downtown Sacramento. You have just royally messed up how many layers of systems. Let's say, you look at what's happening in Iran. Okay, we're going to turn off the internet. Well, Iran is a major country, but it's not like the United States. And so this is the fear that we have. I don't know if we're quite to that.
Have to put meat on those bones. But the way I would start with it, because now we have issues of how do we not just fall into some very problematic perennialism where we saw all views are the same? How do we not end up saying that, well, there's no such thing as judgment? Because that right there is a moral difference, and people feel like they're lying if they don't bring up their Christianity to people because I'm sending you to hell or different things. So how do we deal with the encounter? In the mental model, I always like how Ivan Illich talks about the Good Samaritan, where he says you're surprised by the man on the side of the road. Like you're surprised by the person you encounter. So if we can't deal with pluralism, so you could theoretically, I would argue, the dream of the Enlightenment.
And I think that's leveraging a bit of trust. There's so much trust. There's a lot of trust in the TLC, and part of this is small. The TLC does an amazingly small amount of editing. There are very, very few people who are sort of locked out. Very few. And the lockouts, compared to the number of participants, are very small. In other words, there's a fair amount of good faith, there's a fair amount of trust, and that trust affords a lot more. And so I think, again, it's not as bad as our anxieties tell us, but this basic work that we're doing is part of the
is a way to deal with differences, make everyone to get everyone on the same autonomous rationality, the same internally consistent system. Please note, internally consistent is not the same as generally consistent, but if we can all actually kind of follow the same view, then logic and rationality will bind us, and we should always.
And that's sort of the Enlightenment dream, and you can hear that from the New Atheists. I mean, Sam Harris says that the main problems of the world are tribalism and what was the second one? And so Sam Harris's solution is, well, rationality. Rationality can tell you what is good, and rationality will be like doing long division. It might take a little work, and you might have to go through the steps, but if you divide this number by this number, you will always get the same answer, and everyone will have the same answer, and once we all agree on what that answer is, then the world will be great. And this is where his Gödel point comes in, because no, that's a closed system. It's not going to work that way.
No, the Enlightenment is not crazy to try to seek this dream, because the religious wars, we may be critiquing the Enlightenment a lot today, but do we really have a better alternative if all we're doing is killing one another and isolating and herkimerity?
It happened for a reason.
Yeah, man, because autonomous rationality means we have a way to bring ourselves together. Now, it reduces our personhood and reduces our qualities and diversity and humanity, but if all we're going to do is use our humanity to kill one another, is it really that bad?
It was, it was just one of those collapsing structures that allowed us to do something. But it's not objective. It's not
absolutely. And basically, I would say the dream continues in the Nicklandian AI, which is basically just the spread of the fungibility logic. I would say, to start, the question of pluralism should be focused on not getting everyone to have the same views, but the encounter itself, encounterology, the surprise of, say, the Christian and the atheist, the running into one another. And when I talk about the Gödel point is not a point above the encounter. Is what you're doing is you're coming into the encounter to meet the other in a way. It's not that you stop believing in your ideas, but you have to make a live judgment and discernment with the other person. Because I would argue most people, when they encounter other people, their ideas are talking through them more than they're talking their ideas. Actually, one of the weird things is
there's the program. Their ideas are talking through them more than they're talking their ideas. The ideas have us. And again, obviously so, we've been formed. It's preconscious. We create institutions unwittingly. Now, again, it's better to have a better formed institution, that there's more upfront, there's more that's actually intelligible. You understand more the sacrifice you're making. Again, we have expectations of outcomes, but a formal institution where there's more knowledge about the risk and reward and understanding about it's not a guarantee, but it is better than the odds of you being able to make it up as you go along all by yourself with the few decades of life and wisdom that you've been able to accumulate. You want to make use of a lot of inherited wisdom, even if it's disrupted by technological disruption, et cetera, et cetera.
Do philosophy precisely to escape ideas. Like there's this whole problem, like ideas, like there's this idea that ideas are a problem. Yeah, but the problem is you already have ideas. And if you don't think about them, they like possess you and they run your life for you, actually. And so there's this weird thing where you have to think about ideas, what makes it look like all you care about is ideas, precisely so you don't care about ideas and you do learn to play guitar without getting paid for it, and you're able to have community, because if you didn't think about stuff is worth doing, even if you don't get paid about it, you wouldn't do it, and now you don't have a community.
Right.
So
Clip the last minute for my wife.
Yes, sir. And so we have to think through ideas precisely so we can meet the other person in a way where our ideas are not getting in the way of the other person. And I would argue you can do that without giving up your beliefs or falling into some sort of lame perennialism. And then in that place of live personal encounter, if you truly believe Jesus is Lord and Savior, and you're like, well, I should shine with that beauty to convince them, then shine with the person of Christ and have that convince them versus a proposition. Right.
Yes.
Because it's not a choice between giving up your beliefs to stand for the other, or like being kind of top-down tyrannical. Shine.
Yeah.
You know, for me, the correct evangelism in this sense is shining. Because shining attracts. You attract people into something if you shine with a certain quality of life. So as you develop that shine, I would hope, if the Muslim truly believes in their beliefs, I would hope that they would try to convince me to be a Muslim. If the Hindu truly believes, you would.
Now, what's interesting, though, is because he's basically talking liberalism here, because that's the idea of liberalism. But there is a container, there is an institution. And again, part of what's been happening is that the container and the institution are being stressed by it. But it's the idea of, okay, we can influence each other. And I think that's the best way. I don't know that as a planet we've come up with better than what Western liberal democracies have done. And I think, right now we're looking at Iran, thinking about, okay, the exchanges that they made. And I could talk a lot about sort of fundamentalisms and this vision of being able to go back and the affordances. I would have to say that the Iranian experiment, from the little that I know, the fact that it hasn't lasted that long is probably a failure. And they'll probably have a revolution and they're going to try something else. And my guess is it'll probably be some kind of pluralistic democracy, because you build the change into the system. It doesn't mean that you're not going to wind up with a bad government, but at least you have the hope that in time you can improve with a minimum of bloodshed, which is usually what revolutions involve. All right, I think that's it for this. I am out of time. All the links for the videos will be below. There's still some Friday slots open. I don't know if they'll be there tomorrow morning or not, but if you're a member, you'll get a little notification of the Google Sheets to put in your name if you want to participate in the Friday live stream. So leave a comment.
Still I have it. There are moments I conveniently forget that I'm a 40-year-old man. The last vestiges of a ghost long dead. A ghost with a messiah complex. A messiah too lazy to rise or ascend. Happily hurt and hard. The hanger-on or haunting of a time past. A heroic dream of the harrowing of hell. Failure to launch. Cling to a life vest. Treading in spells that linger and last. Mom and Dad, righteous and mad, daydreamers with ghosts of their own. My memory of them stoic, looking with aims to pretend. always on the brink of somewhere, each a child dancing on the fence. On down the river, dreamt in the sunshine. Saturday morning cartoons, the only Sabbath I knew. A disciple of Jim Henson and John Hughes. Worship in cathedrals where the Toys R Us, baptized in ball pits, a clown served the sacrament we eat. More Pepsi and Pizza Hut. Say please, say cheese. Between Kurt Cobain, a scrambled cable strain, towers tumbling, Super Bowls, and reality TV, the ghost is constitutionally unwilling and intrinsically unable to see and be seen, searching madly for attention to seek. But you could be anything. Never say never. If you've got nothing nice to say, don't say nothing, ever. Don't talk to strangers. See what I say. Just do it. You don't listen very well, do you? You don't do very well, do you? You're not looking too good, are you? Keep up. Appearances aren't what they seem. Will you ever grow up? You look like you're stuck. You think you took too much. Echoes the ghost within the host who prays the dead bury their dead and stay buried in a fading dream.
Well, I don't know about the meaning crisis, left, right, black, white, or other vices, which Jesus Christ is right, or if we're all saved. From my perspective, our propositions participate procedurally, running in circles. Remember in body, we're in the age of decay. Symbolically speaking, the reapers are reaping, them damn egregores are whispering sweetly. We're all NPCs in the belly of the beast. Red pill, blue pill, bread pill, Mars Hill, or DMT, or whatever you feel. Got one and number two, it's all the same damn thing. So clean your room, repent on Zoom, ontology for dummies, a bird's eye view. 'Cause if you really knew, could you really even say? Totally depraved, all totally saved. A total disposition from the bed we all made. Or is it the elect? Or are we just insane? From John Vervaeke to Jonathan Pajot and Jordan Peterson to the Chris Pacou Show. Paul Vanderklays and Griswold Grimm and all the dice he shakes. This estuary ditty is a little bit cringy, ain't quite the U-shaped or the hero's journey. All the NPCs in the flood treading water to watch you save the day with a bunch of chitter-chatter. From the ortho bros to the Catholic Joes, or atheistic Jobs, to Protestant folks, the Joe Schmoes, and Jewish Jacobs, and everything in between. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, and with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own.